Okay, good afternoon or good night or whatever time you're watching this. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Community Movement Builders Dallas Political Education class. This right here is a special class because everybody mute your mic real quick, everybody. So this is a special class because this is the first of a series. We're gonna hope to continue where we read the entire book. We are our own Liberators by Jalil Muntaquim, and we're doing this with the author of the book. He is joining us. So we hope to continue this class, and anybody watching this out there on YouTube, you could reach out to Yafael Balagoon. He's the head of the Dallas chapter to see if you can join. With that being said, this class, we're going to go through the first chapters here, leading up to page 25, or really 24. So 1 through 24. With that being said, I'm ready to start when you are, Baba Jalil.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, peace, pause, Baragani, John Bo. How's everyone doing?
All power to the people.
All power to the people. That's a fact.
We the man.
Yeah. You know, I didn't know we were going to go through this entire book like this. I thought we were just going through chapters, different pieces, and you're going to let me know which pieces we're going to go through.
Okay.
Right? So, but however, if we're going to go through the entire book, then let me ask, how much has everyone read the book? Has the book been read in its entirety or no?
Not yet. I don't think everybody read the entire book. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree. I haven't read the whole book in its entirety.
Okay. All right. So, as you know, the book was written over almost, geez. Let me see, what it says the first printed it is. That's the little one back there. 2000 was the first printing, right? And I wrote it maybe four years before that, 4 or 5 years before that. It's been in existence about 25 years. All right, so some of the information here maybe will be outdated. However, it's still relevant, right, because of the historical foundation and content. Okay, so we have the introduction. You guys read the introduction. I'm not going to go through the introduction. Abomination. Abomination is an abomination. Okay, so this was really a prose, right? Because I was looking at, and I'll be honest with you, I also shed a happy tear when Obama was inaugurated or put in office. And I did so just for the historic nature of it, right? And understanding that to what point where we have come in this country, in as much as we either elect a black or a melanated a president, right, of this country, right? That this country had the capacity to do so. However, I was not at all inured to the point of we dealing with a neo-colonialist. And so I wrote this prose to address that issue, right? Because it just came out of me that way. And I don't know, do you want me to read this?
We can read through it, or if you got a summary, we could read through it.
Okay, well,
it was supposed to read it through the week prior. They were supposed to read the first 24 pages, so they should have
first 24 pages. All right, cool. I'm glad you told me that. All right, first 24 pages. Very good. All right, so yeah, so that's the reason why this piece was written. In order to relieve my spirit of not going wayward, because a melanated person was elected president of the United States, right? So, but again, I maintain. As a matter of fact, I think I wrote something today saying that the abomination became an abomination, right? And if it fails to stop the bombing of nations from Gaza and Afghanistan, the American people must take a stand to tell Obama to forge a better plan to free the land of Zionists and the Taliban. So basically, I'm just trying to deal with the kind of concerns that we have, both on a national and international level, and tying those forces, tying that understanding together, particularly as it applies to the Middle East, right? And we see what's going on in the Middle East today, where we have this genocide going on in the country. And then tying that to our struggle, as I said, on the home front, right? Martin Luther King proclaimed that we as a people will get to the promised land, while Malcolm X said it will be neither the ballot or the bullet, right? It should be hard to understand the 44th like a Manchurian candidate, right? I mean, that means someone who's been propped up to serve a purpose for others, as a proxy, right? Manipulating the political landscape, permitting the Patriot Act. And we know that under Obama, there's more Black people being murdered and killed in this country, incarcerated in this country, and that he raised the divot in terms of offering military supplies and finances to Israel. So basically, he was not a revolutionary in any sense of the nature of the word, right? On page 13, we go to We Are All Liberators. I just try to lay down a foundation. Our foundation is based upon the idea that we are, in fact, the only ones who will liberate ourselves, and no one else has the capacity or the willingness or desire or necessity to do so, right? And in so doing, I came to the conclusion that we must build fronts. We have to build united fronts as best as we possibly can. Said in the second paragraph, we must be done on all fronts in the class within our movement towards national liberation. Right? I was involved. Give you an example. I was recently asked to make a presentation for the Urban League up here in Rochester. Right? And I told them what I was going to present, a PowerPoint presentation. Right, going from 1492 to the present, and how we got to where we are today. The world got to where we are today, right? And so when I told them that, they said, "Well, maybe we'll pair you with someone else rather than you give your PowerPoint," right? So they paired me with this other author, female, a woman by the name of Katie Bloom, right? And I thought it was going to be, that's going to be it. Then a week later, they called me back and said, "Yo, we getting too much pushback." Right, and so we're asking you to not present. So that indicates to me to what degree that we have to deal with what I call class struggle, right? And I wrote them back and said, this reminds me of what Malcolm X says about the March on Washington, right? How it was first black, right? And it was hot and it was strong, and then they had to add a little milk to it, right? It became cool, it became lighter, it became weak, okay? And that's what happened, right? So we find that in regards to our struggle, we will always have to engage these petty bourgeoisie Negroes, right? We have to challenge them. And that is part of the class struggle, right? Because for the most part, they are assimilationists, right? They have become assimilationists, or what was used in the civil rights movement, integrationists, right? Integrationists, but not only integrationists, but they have assimilated into the system, and that is an extremely difficult situation that we have to engage with in terms of changing their minds, recognizing their trauma, and not knowing their own identity or their self-worth beyond coattailing to the imperialists, to white folks. One thing is important for us to understand in regards to our struggle overall, based upon this introduction, is what is said on page 15, right? That despite what we have to go into, right, despite the fact that we lost the battles of the 60s, a fall in the pit is a gain to the wit, right? Our Luther continues, struggle continues, the war is not over. And Viscerama, we will win in the long run. And that's the point what I'm making, right? In the long run, we will win. But the only way we're going to win is you got to stay in it. You got to stay in it to win it, okay? And if you're not in it, we're not going to never win it, okay? And matter of fact, the greater probability, if we're not in it, that we're going to be annihilated. And that's what they're trying to do on all levels, okay? And that's the reason why we fight in this case on genocide.
Real quick, I wanted to say, like, just for just a quick discussion point to the class, like, what does that he touched on the importance of calling out the petty bourgeoisie, but why is it important for us to do that? Because I know in one sense, you know, if they just say, well, it's a victory because somebody became president, how that could suppress the movements, right? That could suppress the imagination, right? Because, you know, when we're thinking about liberation, if we're not thinking about that and defining that as like a liberation of our nation, right, then we'll accept kind of handouts or crumb victory. So does anybody else want to add to that, or does anybody have any questions so far?
That was good, brother. That was good, Zahir. I like that. I like that. It's important for us to take the time to talk about, you know, certain passages, certain things being said, so we make sure we have full understanding. But class struggle, again, it goes back to three-phase theory for national independence, class struggle for national unity, right? We have to engage in class struggle because we have to challenge our own in order to strengthen our capacity to eventually engage the ultimate, the principal enemy of our struggle in a way that we can, in fact, win. As I made mention here on page 15, third paragraph, therefore, a national strategy for economic empowerment must be forged within a national political strategy for total liberation. That means we have to come to terms with our economic power, whatever economic power we claim that we have, and be able to ensure that monies in our community returns back to the community at least 5 times, 6 times. Right now, I've read a piece where they said money in the Black community leaves the Black community within 8 hours, right? The money got into the leaves the Black community in about 8 hours. In the Jewish community, this stays, I think, 7 to 8 days. And the white community says 10 to 12 days, something of that nature, right? Well, the money is circulating in the community, but that goes to a matter of consciousness, right? And also having the capacity to establish certain types of economic institutions that serve the interests of our community. And so for us, we need to develop our economic base along with our political understanding and strategy development. As a matter of fact, today I had a meeting with 2 filmmakers, right? 2 brothers here in Rochester, filmmakers, and they didn't know each other, but I brought them 2 together, right? And then discussed the possibility of trying to create a mechanism for which our story is told on the big screen, right? Or at least in TV series, right? The stories of liberation, stories of resistance, right? And in so doing, raise some funds so we can pay for this movement, right? Freedom ain't free, point blank, full stop, right? And so for us, we have to spend treasure and lives, right, in order to be free. And so, in order to do so, it's extremely important that we have our political strategies in position and a cultural foundation that supports that political strategy. And therefore, economic empowerment or economic development must be part of the political strategy as well. All right. And unfortunately, as I say, the so-called progressive forces have placed their own agendas and programs above Black people themselves. That means that we're in competition with one another rather than cooperation with one another in terms of the progressive community. And that's problematic. But you know where it comes from? It comes from our indoctrination into the system of capitalism. There cannot be individualism. All right. If you take individualism out of capitalism, there's no capitalism. All right. If you take competition out of capitalism, there's no capitalism. So what are the 2 opposites of individual competition? Unity and cooperation. And so for us, it is imperative that our goals and struggles is always seeking the means to create greater unity and greater cooperation, particularly amongst the progressive forces, right? We have to be in constant conversation and discussion with one another, right? The other day, we had a conversation under the Spirit of Mandela Coalition. We had a meeting, and one of the things that we talked about, because we was at the Boston Curb Fest, right, with myself and Jihad, and we had a debate, right? Jihad and I had a debate, right? Jihad took one position, I took another position, right, and discussing certain issues, right? And we find that for me personally, right, it was good. It was enlightening. It challenged us in our capacity to understand the nature of our struggle and our positions in terms of that. However, Spirit of Mandela is going to begin the process of developing a series of debates from individuals that we can put online and have people understand the nature of our struggle as part of debate. But I said, let's not call it debate, let's call it discussions, right? Because debates always lend to the idea that there's two opposite sides, right? And I don't want to engage in opposite sides of this debating, because ultimately at the end, the two sides will go back to their own insulated corners, right? And so rather than call it a debate, let's call it a discussion, right? We're going to have open discussions, right? We're going to have panel discussions between different organizations, different groups. And so we have a better understanding of each other rather than holding this kind of division amongst us, right? And competition and individualism, right? So we have to get rid of that and move towards cooperation and unity. So that's basically the idea that was put forth in the intro, right? And establish some foundation of what we deal with in our overall struggle. And at the end of that, right, at the end of page 17, I said, again, a national strategy for economic empowerment is an essential and necessary step for fulfillment of the objective of political empowerment, right? If we ain't built the economic base for our success, then they're gonna come back and continue to reap exorbitant profits from us to exploit us, right? Because we have no control of our value, right? As a people and as an oppressed nation, all right. Africans in diaspora.
Can I jump in? And
Yeah,
anybody, if you want to raise your hand, and if you got a question or comment, just say something, and I can recognize you. But one thing I think is important, because you had said engaging with people and building a united front. And if you could go into what united front kind of is a little bit more, but I wanted to say, I think a thing that I've observed from movements is sometimes I think we get too antagonistic towards other groups, even if they're a little bit more progressive. Like, we tend to shut them down too much instead of building, I think, unity between folks. I know I've been guilty of it sometimes before in the past, but I think it's important to unify as much as we can to stay on that what you just said. Instead of conflict, we needed cooperation if we were going to try to build a different type of nation.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you asked the question about fronts. What is the front? And if you go to chapter, and I don't know if we want to go so far ahead, but in chapter for the liberation of North America, right? In the chapter of the concept of revolutionary leadership, you'll find the answer to that question. So when I break down what is a cadre development, I break down what's a front, right? A political party, a coalition, and a front, right? In that chapter. And a front is, for the most part, it comprises of several organizations, not just a single organization, right? Whereas a political party is a political party, people under a line, a mass line, and a political line under a leadership as an organization. That is a party, okay? Whereas the front would comprise of maybe unions, organizations, street organizations, political parties, coalitions, social groups, etc. Right? All of those can be part of the front. So the front basically is it establishes a foundation from which many other organizations find commonality, right? And those commonalities in our struggle has to be anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-white supremacist, anti-sexist, anti-hierarchy, or patriarchy, right? Those are the things that we oppose. And if you find other organizations and individuals who are sitting on those same principles, that's who you want to align with, all right? That's what you want to build your base. And so in that instance, that's where we began the process of building of the United Front. So we have the collective, the community leader, squads, and organizational development speaks on that as well. So when we get to there, we'll talk about the front development and what it means to organize a national liberation front, and particularly as it applies to the national strategy of folding out from the liberation of the African nation, because the front, that is the front, right? It will be the front, folding out. Okay, soon we will be rolling out, hopefully within the next 6 months, we'll be rolling out a introductory, we will be introducing folding out as a process of building a national liberation front in this country. Africans in diaspora and the Black bourgeoisie. Okay, I don't think I really need to go too much into this area because we know who the national bourgeoisie are, right? Who represents the national bourgeoisie? That would be those individuals in Congress and the Senate who runs for president. Many of them are corporate interests, and they function in the capacity of being a neo-colonial agent for the colonial government. Okay, that's how they function. They are the buffer in the cahoots with oppression, whether consciously or unconsciously, based upon their own ideas, based individualism and competition. Okay, and they feel that they have an allegiance. Their allegiance is greater to the system than they are to their people. Okay, the bourgeoisie, and so we have to recognize them and put them on notice, right? Whenever we can, put them on notice that they are cooperating with the enemy. Now, let me say something about that. I don't know if I said it before, but let me share something about the national bourgeoisie, right? They have been so traumatized, right, by national oppression. They have been so assimilated into the system of white supremacy, right, and integrated into white supremacy that, for the most part, in my thinking, they're crazy. They're out of their minds. All right. When I say that in this one, I remember watching the movie Roots. Right? I don't know how many of y'all saw that Roots. Right? But they had a guy in the movie named Roots called Chicken George. And Chicken George was a lackey on the plantation, right, for the most part. Right? And after the Emancipation Proclamation, and he was told that he's now free, right? He turned around, looked at everybody and says, I don't know how to be free. I don't know how to be free. See, and that's the mentality of the national bourgeoisie. Right? They don't know how to excise themselves from the system of oppression. Right? They don't know how to be free. Right? And that's what makes them dangerous. That makes them dangerous not only the national bourgeoisie, but also the petty bourgeoisie, national black petty bourgeoisie, which is divided into two parts. But in our understanding that, we go on to page 21, right? And at the top of page 21, well, let me start at page 20. And where it says, during the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, the government facilitated and formed a constant and consolidated a black middle and upper middle class, right? Because in the struggle of the 60s, for the most part, your doctor lived next to your mailman, who lived next to your delivery driver, or who lived next to your lawn and gardens keeper, or your sanitation worker, right? We all lived in the community together, okay? And we're strong in that capacity. But then with the idea of the civil rights movement and integration, we began to think, well, maybe it'd be better if we lived next to white folks, right? Rather than fighting for our own capacity to award ourselves with what I again say, our value. What are we of value? Right? What we bring to the table, right? As a people and as a nation. And we, as you well know, since you are conscious, we are a brilliant, brilliant people, right? But we're not organized, and we've been traumatized for over 450 years. And so we have to restore that understanding of who we are and our value. And so I'll go on and say, also, they diligently work to undermine and prevent the national revolutionary movement for self-determination. That's what the petty bourgeoisie do. That's what the bourgeoisie do. They will seek to undermine our struggle, right? This is what the Urban League, the CORE, the NAACP, the SCLC, right? That's how they function. That's what they do, right? When there was rioting going on in different cities, they brought who? They brought in Martin Luther King, right, to quell the riot, okay, to slow them down, right? They bring these preachers in to quell the insurrection. I say riot, because riot comes from white folks rioting against black people. That's where the word comes from. But anyway, the insurrection of black folks, all right? And so that's what they use the petty bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie elements to do. Okay, so eventually it was developed into a point that these Negro leaders to threaten the racist colonial government for more token reforms. This is how they want to intervene, to see how they can gain and win more from the enemy government for their own aspirations, right? And their primary interest of class is the interest of the government to prevent Black liberation. The Black bourgeoisie policy of integration and assimilation denies the existence and development of revolutionary national culture that would further support the social, psychological, and liberation of Africans in the diaspora. Rather than the Black bourgeoisie policy instituted mental shackles that affirm the neurosis, the neurosis that is talked about in Wretched of the Earth and Black Skin, White Mask, and Don Colonialism, and Franz Fanon aptly put it and explained to us, right? And some of the results of our tortured slave Black codes, the Jim Crow institutional racism experience. Such neurosis, and I said it is a mental illness, such neurosis defines the loss of personal identity and delusions, right? Where we have people, or a lot of our sisters now, wearing these straight hairs and European hairdo rather than their own natural hairstyle, right? Trying to look and appeal to others in a capacity that is more identified with white people than it does with African people. Okay, that's problematic. But nevertheless, that's where our heads are at this time. So the bottom of the page, I go on page 21. Malcolm X is one of the many analogies compared to the house Negro and the field Negro, and how the house Negro helped to save the master's house from burning, while the field Negro prayed a strong wind would ensure it burned to the ground. Right. So that question to ask: are we ready to burn this bad boy to the ground? His analogy appropriately explains the present relationships of the Black bourgeoisie, the house Negroes, maintained with the colonial U.S. government. And the same mentality prevails whereby the bourgeoisie have become neo-colonial agents of government. Right? They are agents of government, whether consciously or unconsciously. Okay. And we cannot express that in no other way, no other term. All right. They are agencies, right? And therefore become agent, right? In the capacity from which they try to maintain the movement, right, within the confines of what is permitted to resist, what is permitted to protest, what is permitted to demonstrate, right, within the dictates of white folks who write the laws. Okay, so, and that's what they do. That's how they function. As I stated here, I don't know how to be free. I wrote in the book here from that root to me. I call him Chicken George. His name was Fiddler. Excuse me. His name was Fiddler, right? Entertainment world. The house Negro neurosis persists to the detriment of the oppressed nation. Their assimilation denies an identification with the historically determined reality of Africans and diasporas, total relationship with American capitalism in all of its racial exploitative manifestations. In this regard, as Malcolm says, right, my first allegiance is to Black, the big Black first, right? My sympathies are Black. My allegiance is Black. My whole objectives are Black. I'm not interested in being American because America has never been interested in me. No, I'm not an American. I'm one of the 22 million Black people who are victims of Americanism and one of the victims of democracy, nothing but disguised hypocrisy. Powerful words. Powerful words. Why? Because he divorced himself from this system. He divorced himself from identifying with this system. I had a conversation today, and I told people, I don't identify myself as an American. They looked at me shocked. I said, I'm a New African. Right? And I explained to them what a New African is and why I identify with that. Why would I identify myself to a corporate entity, which the United States is, right, who continues to exploit the resources, the labor of people around the world, who is engaged, who foundations based upon genocides, right, who established itself based upon the enslavement of African people? Why would I want to identify with that? Okay. And in doing so, what I'm doing, I'm essentially, if I were to do so, I'm simply being complicit in the enemy or in the government, the corporate entity doing the things they're doing around the world. All right. So no, we don't identify with this entity. I'll go on in this chapter and explain certain the ills that we suffer in our community. Right. Naturally, these numbers have changed since 25, almost 30 years ago. But the conditions for Black people in this country has not. Right. The numbers have probably increased. Right. The conditions have become more deadly. Here, I give an example in Rochester. Rochester, the third poorest city in the country. Third, right? Every other child in Rochester 1 out of 2 children in Russia is living in poverty. 1 every 2 child. So if I see 2 kids walking down the street, 1 of the kids is living in poverty. All right, that's why the crime rate that is in our communities today, right? Poverty is progenitor for criminal behavior. Understand that, right? You look at affluent communities, they don't have the crime as they do in the poor community, in the impoverished community, right? Because they have the resources, right? Where our community does not, right? And it's created, it is designed that way. Okay, these policies and regulations that they created are designed that way. That's why we have the confrontation with or have the issues of homelessness amongst us, because of gentrification, another form of breaking down our communities, right? Dividing us from establishing a stronghold in any major city where we have the capacity to have some degree of influences on what goes on in our community. And so our conditions in terms of impoverishment is extremely high, right? That's the reason why, again, I made the argument, I made the point that we had to have an economic strategy in alliances with our political strategy. So we have to be able to feed ourselves. We have to be able to clothe ourselves, right? And so that's part of three-phase theory as well. Right, and so I break down certain positions that people have, the inspiring rhetoric of at that time with Jesse Jackson and Minister Farrakhan provide little solace, right, to the degree of oppression Africans in diaspora suffers, right? All the speeches they made, how has our condition changed? In what capacity? To what degree? I'll give you another, and I don't really like to raise criticisms for one who might be progressive in this speech, right? But if you look at Chicago, and for long as the NOI been in Chicago, how come they don't control Chicago? How come they don't have a strong presence in terms of the politics of Chicago, right? How come their community, we don't have a strong Black enclave, right? That's empowered in Chicago after all these years, right? I mean, what, 60, 70 years? And you don't have that power base? Who should be led? The mayor, the city council, the police chief? It should be those individuals that was appointed or at least voted upon by our own candidates or a slated candidate in Chicago. That's kind of power and authority they should have. But do they? They do not. All right. So the rhetoric, as I may mention here, right, provide little solace to the degree of oppression Africans in diaspora. So this is especially significant where they fail to formulate and implement national campaigns and programs that directly address the pervasive genocidal conditions of social, political, and economic disenfranchisement. Right? I mean, the NOI should have a major since they essentially Black capitalists, right? And for the most part, right? They should have major businesses in every city across the country, raking in money, right? And have that money provide services in our community. They don't do that. It's not happening. So this is problematic for me. Leader says the electoral process has consistently failed to alter the change in any large degree the general conditions of Black impoverishment, right? Electoral politics, for the most part, is the illusion of inclusion, right? You think he really made a difference by voting for some hinky-head Negro, right? Thinking that he's going to change the conditions, the socioeconomic conditions of Black people in this country, right? It is for the most part. Now, let me make this especially clear. Electoral politics can be tactical. It can be used as a tactical means to organize people and get people involved and engaged. But in order to do so, right, the candidates that you run has to be revolutionary, at least as most progressive as they possibly can be, right? You can't run a liberal, expect some revolutionary change. That's not going to happen. Okay, but what you can do, for instance, here in Rochester, they have 9 members of Rochester City Council. Okay, and so we have four people on that council right now. 4 of our people, 4 people from the streets, and we ran them as a slate, as a block, right? If you vote for one, you got to vote for all 4. Okay, and in that capacity, we're empowering our community and setting conditions for that when the mayor does something, right, it has to go through city council. City council has the right to veto or amend or change it, right? So we're trying to get a couple more people to get on the city council so we have a quorum so that we be able to actually veto anything that the mayor does that's not contributing to the conditions of our community, right? And in the process of doing so, we're raising consciousness as we run these candidates and raise people's understanding of why they should vote for our people rather than those people. All right. Very similar to, now there's contradictions, and no doubt about that. You look at Jackson, Mississippi. You know, I mean, there are contradictions. You have the mayor. The mayor evolved from out of a revolutionary family. All right. But nonetheless, there are contradictions. So the contradiction is not the tactical initiatives. The contradictions is within the politics of the community, right? And being able to hold people accountable based upon their political beliefs and understanding what that means. And so, page 24, in terms of the national program or national strategy or national program that I proposed, right, within these writings, let's go through them. All right. Let me see. I want you all to read with me today. Okay. So let's see. Quentin, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Brother Quentin, can you read number 1, please, on page 24?
Yeah. Number one, to demand reparations for the loss of millions of African lives during the Middle Passage from all nations/countries who were active participants in the slave trade and for the centuries of the brutal chattel slavery in this country.
Right. Now, reparations. I got issues with reparations. Reparation means to repair, right? To make something that's been broken to make it whole again. This colonial government cannot do that, right? And our capacity to force them to do that, we're not there yet. Okay. So my position is that we can call for reparations to what they say, till the goose come home or the cow come home, whatever they say, right? But gaining reparations means building a movement, right? It means building a base from which you have power, where you demand, as Frederick Douglass said, right, in the city where I'm living at, where he's from, right? Power concedes nothing without a demand, right? And so we have to be in a position to make those kind of demands. And we're not there yet. Why we're not there? Because we're not unified on a national level, right? On this issue. Second of all, any reparations that's to be demanded has to include the release of our political prisoners. It has to, right? I don't care what reparation organization and group is hollering about it. If they ain't also demanding the release of our political prisoners, it's a sham. Okay, and we need to call them out on that. Okay. And second of all, reparations is more than just the question of receiving money, right? It has to be about land, obtaining land. Now I say that on this. Just the other day, I was watching a news program, and some white woman, a professor, right, ran upon some documents and found out that the document was a title, right, a deed for some lands that was given to some black people, right, during the Emancipation Proclamation, the 40 acres that was supposed to have been promised to Africans who were emancipated back then, the 40 acres. She come to find out, as she did more research, she found about almost 2,000 titles, right, of land that belonged to African people. And then when we looked at the map of those titles, right, they're right there on the coastline of the East Coast coastline of Field Order number 15. Field Order number 15 stated from South Carolina, the coast of South Carolina to the Florida Basin, right, would be emancipated land for black people. And then when we look at the map for this woman, when she found these deeds, that's that land, that's that territory. And that's the territory where we were building for our own emancipation. We was building a sovereignty, a sovereign land, right? And went to the Hayes-Tilden Compromise that we lost that land, okay, the majority of that land, and established 100 years of terror, right, of lynching and terror against Black, brown, and indigenous people, right? So historically, and it's not preserved, or at least not taught, right, is that we was beginning the processes of building our own sovereign nation, right? The freedmen bureaus was an organized structure, a foundation for establishing governing during that period of time, okay? And during the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, right, where Rutherford B. Hayes won the collegiate vote, right, and Samuel Tilden won the popular vote, who was a Confederate, all right? They compromised and, well, Buchanan and Hayes, you take the presidency, but you got to remove the troops, right? The Yankee troops that was guarding this territory that was emancipated for these Africans, these free Africans, all right? And so that's what they did, right? Remove the troops, and what happened? 100 years of lynching. The Confederates became the Ku Klux Klan and began to terrorize those territories, that land base, right, which was originally ours, until the point where people began to migrate out of the South, right, to the East and the West. Point number 2, Tongo, could you read point number 2, please?
Yeah, sorry, I'm on the phone, so it's hard to get it, but I can get it. Uh, to build a national independent Black political party that challenges the two-party system of government on behalf of the misrepresented oppressed nation.
Right. Now, since writing that, I began to really think about whether or not we need to have a third party, right? A national political party, independent political party. Because then that means that we have to also engage in electoral politics and then be competitive against both the Democratic and the Republican party. Now, this does not negate the fact that we need to build an independent political party, right? Black Panther Party was an independent political party, okay? The only thing is that how the party is going to operate, how it's going to function, okay? And I don't think that it should function in a capacity. Nowadays, I do not think, based on this writing, that it should function in a capacity where it is seeking to become representative of this corporate entity that we call the United States. We don't need our people to be representative of this corporate entity. We need our people to be representative of our own nation. So if we're going to build a third party, right, within the system, then that party's goal and objectives should be based upon building the capacity from which we can liberate ourselves and establish our own nation. Otherwise, it's going to be ultimately it's going to be co-opted and become complicit with the system and opposing the initiatives for national liberation and freedom. And why do I say that? Because power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. Right. And if the game for power is not to empower the people, right, then we have a problem of people trying to empower themselves or their own entity and safeguard on the basis of that. Point number 3, Adrienne, can you read that, please?
Yes, to formulate a national strategy for economic development of the African community, including the means and method to centralize the annual $300 billion in purchasing power to better serve our struggle for national liberation, for the establishment of a national association of African businesses for economic independence.
Exactly right. That's where we need to go. I just made mention earlier today that I was talking to some filmmakers, trying to figure out a way how we can get value from our talent and what we know, and also be able to continue to promote our struggle going forward from a historical point of view. We have to create some forms of economic development for our people, right, and for our movement, for the future of our nation, all right? Again, like I said about the political party, the National Independent Political Party, if it's not a party based upon freeing the land or building a base of that divorces us from the system, from this corporate entity, then it is one that's going to be in cahoots with the corporate entity, and ultimately it will betray the movement, right? And so it is essential that we build our own economic foundations and move forward. We can build this by aligning ourselves with the concept and ideas of Pan-Africanism, right? That we build contract and working relationships out of Africa and the Caribbean and Africans in the diaspora, right? That will be the foundation for which we can move forward. All right, and establish our independent capacity to grow wealth, to establish wealth, generational wealth. All right, that's one way. For an example, I ask you to open up your minds and just imagine the Republic of New Africa, right, and the Ministry of Economics, or the Ministry of the Ministry of Finance or Economics. I don't know what the name of that ministry is, right? He should be developing contracts right now, right, in parts of Ghana and Nigeria, or in Benin and other places, as a corporate entity, creating a corporate entity in order to do so, right, and representing our interests in our community, right? There are sisters and brothers in Africa who are making African products, right? We need to figure out a way. A long time ago, while I was inside, I was thinking about establishing import and export business, right? So that I can import the products from out of Africa and export the products that we make here, okay, and create that kind of trade relationship that we need to have between our African brothers and sisters, either on the continent and in the Caribbean. All right. So this is where we have to begin to start thinking in terms of our overall struggle. Right? How do we going to develop our struggle? I stated again, right? Freedom ain't free. Okay. So we have to begin the process of thinking about how to establish a foundation from which our economic power becomes our political wealth. Not diverse, right? Our economic power becomes our means for which we can build our political foundations and build the institutions that we need to do, right? And unifying our struggle. And right now, I think that our alleged purchasing power is almost $1 trillion, right? That's how much money we spend. But that money never stays in our community. And the reason why is because we don't have the economic organizational structures to raise our consciousness and develop the means from which our people recognize it is better to spend black, buy black, and spend black than to spend for white folks, right? And that also means that those black businesses that we have in our community, they need to share, right? We had Curb Fest in front of a place called Ujama health food store, right? Giving back. He opened up the doors. The Black Panther Party received donations from black business owners. Sometimes we had to charge them up, right? Let them know, hey, we ain't playing no games. You know what I'm saying? But we receive donations to feed our children, right? We receive donations to bail some of our people out, right? So we had a relationship with them. You see what I'm saying? With the black businesses in our community. And we raised their profile and say, these businesses work with us, those businesses do not. Okay. And that's one way that we organize our basis for developing a power base, both economic and politically. Point number 4, who's that? Phil Marshall. Phil Marshall, are you there? Yafu, can you Balagoon? Can you do it? I see you in the store.
Yes, sir, I'm here. Which point you want me to read, sir?
Point number 4.
Okay, hold on. Okay, there it is. To establish a national program for feeding, clothing, housing, and education of our children who are living and suffering in dire poverty. This includes the development of a national healthcare campaign whereby our own health physicians become responsible for healthcare of our communities, to establish and maintain community health clinics as previously done by the Black Panther Party.
Absolutely, absolutely, right? And what does that do? It creates infrastructure, organizational infrastructure for our movement, right? It allows us to create the conditions from which we have a direct relationship with the community. We're feeding the babies, we're clothing our children, we're finding housing for our people, right? We're serving our community, right? But unlike the Black Panther Party, whose survival programs pending revolution, what we're going to be doing, because I got a problem with that, and that's one reason why we have to build on that. Rather than survival programs build pending revolution, right? We can build decolonization programs for our liberation, right? Similar idea, but a decolonizing program is more proactive than a survival program pending revolution. But the same kind of relationship we need to have with our community, right? Where we are providing services in our community with the ideological and political basis for doing so. And creating infrastructure, organizational infrastructure at this point, right? Free breakfast programs, health services, transportation, other needs that our community may have, housing, other needs our community may have, right? And when we begin to provide these services to our community, you have an interactive relationship with them, right? And then you provide them the information they need to decolonize their minds, right? Decolonize their thinking, recognize that it's best to come to our people for their needs and their services rather than those people who will continue to seek the means to exploit them, rather than build for our national liberation and independence. Quentin, no, Quentin's already read. Zahir, read number 5, please.
Number 5, to demand community control of the school boards and city bureaucracies that appropriate funds for our schools. For college students to organize the National Alliance of African Students Associations and unions to establish a program for tutoring high school and elementary students, and developing liberation schools for the political training of our youth.
Very important. That's liberatory. That's liberatory. These are young people who has their mindset on liberation and independence, right? Not only that, but they're taking this information that they have appropriated or gained and learned and giving it back to the next generation, those who's coming behind them, right? So therefore, we have a continuity of the movement, continuity of struggle, right? Right? As we say this way, each one teach one, right? That we need to be able to teach more than one, okay? Each one should be able to teach 5, right? And cadre development. But not only that, right? By building this kind of community control of the school boards, and as an example, we're challenging the school boards saying they're not teaching our children what they need to know, right? We need to develop our own curriculum. I've been in conversations with several of our professors in the movement, and I was sharing with them, hey, we need to build a national curriculum, right? So we have at least a foundation across the country where these books, this material, we're all reading, right? At least as many as we possibly can read, particularly in the movement, that we're all studying this level of material and literature, okay? So we have some commonality in terms of our thinking going forward, right? Thought precedes action, is that correct? How you think about a thing is a determinative factor of what you're going to do, how you make your decisions, right? And so if thought precedes action, then it's imperative that we have our thinking and the capacity that directs our actions for national liberation and independence. So that's the reason why we need to have a national curriculum. So I encourage all of you, if you know a professor in the movement, right, talk to them about that. Raise that question, right? How come we don't have a national curriculum, right, for our movement, for our struggle, right? That's one of the things that will actually, that's one of the most important parts that we have in our movement right now, right? Is how we educate our children, how we educate ourselves to educate our children, right? And in preparation for the hot war, right? We're in war right now. We've been in war since 1619, at least, right? And at times that war ebbs and flows, becomes hot and becomes cold. So right now we're in Cold War period, and we're rebuilding. And they are definitely rebuilding to maintain the order that they have imposed upon us. So demanding community control of the school boards is important. As I mentioned, what we're doing up here in Rochester, and organizing ourselves in terms of these national alliances, right? If we can build a national alliance of student organizations, BSUs, BSAs, and et cetera across the country, right? And have a sit down, right? If we can call for a national conference of BSAs and BSUs on college campuses across the country, right? Coming from our organization, right? And laying down an agenda, making this invitation for them, right? And discuss the issues that's confronting us all across this country. That's major. That's major, all right? Because it establishes the basis from which we have this kind of dialogue for liberation and independence. Okay, we may not agree with everything at all times, right, on this level, but at least there's a basis for which there's communications and dialogue. All right, right now that does not exist, and it needs to exist. And naturally, number 6 is to build a national prison movement for penal justice, addressing the problems of overwhelming number of our people, Black African men and women in prisons across the country, right? We're going to stop the implementation of the death penalty. We know the death penalty is genocidal, particularly for us. They murder innocent people. They put to death innocent people. Okay, we know that, right? And in fact, they said that they can do it. Right? It doesn't matter. The Supreme Court says that it don't matter if you're innocent. Right? If you can't prove your innocence, they can murder you. B, to end the establishment of maxi security control units, right? These dungeons that they have, like Florence ADX, and etc. Like Guantanamo Bay, right? They on these concentration camps where they keep their people in mental bondage, trying to destroy them psychologically. I remember when Susan Rosenberg and Laura Whitehorn and Marilyn Buck. We don't talk enough about Marilyn Buck. Marilyn Buck was a giant, nonetheless. And how they fought in Lexington when they put them in isolation and everything was white, like a silent room, right? And they fought Lexington, Kentucky prison for the sterilization area and won. Okay, and got out of the spot and had the place torn down, right? Change the whole system up, right? We have to do that. But these isolations they're mind destroyers. Okay, I remember being in isolation for 2 years, fighting a New York 8 case. Right, and I don't mind telling you, at one point I almost lost it. Right, for real. Right, they had me in the area of 5 cells and a shower. Right, in the area that in the law books they called the dungeon. They called it the dungeon in the law books. Right, and in those 5 cells, the majority of people that put in those 5 cells are guys who are detoxing or suffering schizophrenia, and they had the TV on 24 hours a day. Number noise, no sunshine, no windows, no clean air, right? And when the shower's on, what happens? You get that humidity. You can't breathe. It's hard to breathe. I had to sleep on the floor because they had me in a plexiglass cell originally. I had to sleep on the floor and try to breathe from underneath the door, right? In order to get some air. Yeah. I had to go deep. I had to go deep inside to find that Jalil Muntaquim, right? And stand up on that. Yeah. And that's what happens to a lot of your brothers inside these camps who are held in these isolation units, right, for years at a time. Mine was extreme. That situation there was extreme. It was 2 years, like that. I didn't see the sun. I didn't see the sun for 2 years. I didn't know what it felt like for 2 years. Okay. Yeah. You know what I mean? I didn't have no fresh air for 2 years. I was going from the courtroom to the cell. From the courtroom to the cell. Yeah. 2 years. Fighting that case. So we have to go down deep. And that's part of the dynamic of this struggle, right? So these maxi security facilities has to be challenged as being inhumane, as being dehumanizing, right? To be actually barbaric. C, to build a national campaign for amnesty and release of political prisoners of war. Of course, we was doing that. We're doing it with the Jericho movement, doing that with the Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition. and various ABC and Federation and many other organizations are moving to ensure that we're fighting for the release of our political prisoners. Let me make one point on that one. One of our political prisoners, Leonard Peltier, right? He's 80 years old. He's becoming frail, right? He's a hero to the indigenous community across this country. Right? They all recognize Leonard Peltier, right? He's coming up for clemency. If you don't get clemency by this guy Biden by December, January, great likelihood we won't be able to free him. And I hate saying that, putting that in an atmosphere like that, but that is the fight. And so for all of you who would support our political prisoners, I ask you to pay close attention to the struggle to free, to win clemency for Leonard Peltier. We need to raise that up. And can you imagine? Let me just share this. We winning? That we get it free? You know how that would resonate across this country? Right? That we had built a movement that demanded, as First Douglas said we need to do, Harvey sees nothing but out of demand, that demanded the release of Leonard Peltier from Biden. It'd be historic. It'd be fantastic. Now, the last time that ever happened was with the Puerto Rican 11, right? And Bill Clinton, right? Not pardon. He granted clemency to 11 Puerto Rican FLN members, right? And how was that done? Because the Puerto Rican community was in support of the liberation of their people. They organized on the island and off the island and put pressure on Clinton to do that. And so I'm calling on all of us to build the campaign. Yes, sir. Thank you, brother, for putting that up. Build the campaign, support the campaign for clemency for Leonard Peltier. If we win that, that'd be a hell of a fight. But also, we're not gonna feel our other political prisoners like Imam Jamil Al-Amin, like Kamal Siddiqui, like Kwame Shakur, and many others that we have locked down. But this one, I think, is strategic in terms of our capacity to win a brother out who is most beloved by those who have most suffered the indignity of being indigenous in this land, right? Who are supposed to be sovereign nations in this land. Okay, to win his release is to win for, in my thinking, win a sizable conscious shift, right? A consciousness shift towards our own capacity to cultivate and maintain power, the power to persuade this country to release our political prisoners. And lastly, is a question of forced labor. As you know, the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution is in fact a slave mandate, okay? In as much as they emancipated the Africans from slavery, they did not end slavery. Slavery in this country has never been abolished. Full stop, period. Never been, right? When they ended chattel slavery of African people, they told white folks and other black folks and so forth, you cannot hold another human being as a slave, right? As your personal property, right? But they also would have said in the 13th Amendment, the state can. The state can. You as an individual cannot, but the state can. The corporate entity can. Okay, but you as an individual, you cannot. Right? As the 13th Amendment states, slavery and involuntary servitude, except for those who have been duly convicted of a crime, should not exist in the United States or in this jurisdiction. So we find that exception clause within the 13th Amendment informs us that slavery was never abolished. It has an exception clause. We did not read the fine print. Okay. And that's problematic. And that's the reason why we have the school to prison pipeline. Right? It's deliberate. They're feeding the slave system. Right? The case called Rufford versus Commonwealth, right, informs specifically from the U.S. Supreme Court that prisoners are slaves of the state. That's what it says. Prisoners are slaves of the state. And so for us, it's important that we understand that slavery has never been abolished. We need to say that out loud, okay? And that our people are in slave camps. The brothers on the block, Thursday, I'm going to be having a roundtable discussion with some of the OGs and the OGs and some of the brothers came out of the system. There's gonna be about maybe 10 or 12 of us, and it's gonna be videotaped. I got 2 camera crews gonna be there for this roundtable discussion, and we're gonna be discussing the issues of crime, the discussion of the violence in our community, right? Violence in our community and poverty, right? We need to build a council of elders, right, in this capacity, and that's what I'm trying to do here. Right, build this council of elders of those brothers who knows the block, so we can try to address these young kids out there killing each other for stupidity, right, over nonsense. All right, we have to do that, and in so doing, disrupt the school to prison pipeline, right? Just inform the brothers on the block. Hey man, ain't nothing to be honored about going to penitentiary. You know, one time they were saying that if you did time, man, you're a real OG. You know that you did something. Hey, what you saying? If you was a slave, you're OG. That's what you saying? All right, we have to start telling. We got people understanding that hey, you've been set to be a slave, man. Right? Ain't no honor in that. So we got to demystify the prison system. We got to demystify this idea that oftentimes we find in the movies. You know what I mean? Like American Me and those kind of movies where they indicate where, you know, being down for your action is being going to the penitentiary. That's some bull. That's some nonsense. That's some colonized mentality right there. Right? Because essentially what you're doing, you're setting yourself up to be exploited. You're setting yourself up to be dehumanized. You're setting yourself up to be devalued. That's what the prison system, that's what the slave penal system is. That's what it does, right? And so for us, tell the brothers on the block, when you see them guys on the block, say, yo, man, you ready to be a slave? Yeah, that's what you're doing? Yeah. You preparing to be a slave? All right, and they're gonna ask the question why? Because the prison system is a slave system. All right. You got to go to work. If you go to work, you stay in them cell 24 hours, 23 hours a day. You're 1 hour recreation back in that cell. Right? You either going to work or you going to school, one or the other. Right? And in most prisons, they qualify 8th grade education is all the education you need. Right? 8th grade. Once you get an 8th grade education, not a high school, not a GED, just enough so you can read and write your name. Basically. Right? That's all work. Then they're gonna put you to work, put you in the field, put you in the industry, and etc. When I was inside, I refused. I refused to work in industry. I refused to work in the mess hall. Because I don't work in the mess hall. Lock me up. I'm not doing it. I'm not working in the industry making your money. Lock me up. Right? If I'm going to work, I'm going to work in a school building where I can teach. Okay? Teach kids GED. Right? Get your GED. Teach a trade or something of that nature. Right? Teach them computer skills or something of that nature. That's what I'm working. Or that, if not that, I'm working out in the yard. Right? I work in the yard so I can go get my exercise on for most of the day. Right? I can do me. You know what I'm saying? I go sweep up some garbage here, some there, and put it away, right? After that, that's all. The rest of the day is mine. I ain't sit up and read books or whatever I need to do. Okay. Well, no, you ain't gonna make a bunch of money off of my behind. That's not happening. All right. And so that's the kind of understanding that the brothers on the block needs to have. That they're being set up. They're being set up so they can become a slave, so they can make exorbitant profits from your labor, pennies on the dollar labor. Millions and millions of dollars. Mass incarceration, that's what it's about. And who they got in there? Black and brown people. The same people they brought to be enslaved in this country are the same people that got in mass incarceration being enslaved. Come on now. That's the reality under this corporate entity that they call the United States. We will try to make what we call that's one of the reasons why we call it the Spirit of Mandela, where I got the name from, was from the Mandela rules, right? Which is the minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners. The standard minimum rules of treatment of prisoners. What they now qualify as the Mandela rule. That's one of the reasons why we use the Spirit of Mandela, right? Because these are rules that negates the conditions of dehumanizing people while they are in prison. And so lastly, in this chapter, right, I think he said, therefore, the new movement of national rectification to rectify, right? And unity must evolve into a class struggle within the nation of Africans in the diaspora. All right. The importance of this class struggle within the nation of blacks is to identify and weed out the neo-colonial agents, these house Negroes. We need to identify them and tar and feather them, right, to put it mildly. Still serving the master, right, to the detriment of the oppressed nation. The strategy and program based on the national unity must be constructed to confront the national oppressor from the position of strength, social, politically, and economically. Right, summing it up. Right. And economically. The class struggle for national unity will establish the means and method for national strategy, and agenda will be developed. Such a strategy will operate to broaden the base for national self-determination and independence. We are an African people. We will never forget. In our Holocaust, we are our own liberators. We never forget our Holocaust, the African Holocaust. Should be a model of the class struggle, whereby an Afrocentric culture perspective will be the creative spirit, inspiring and giving impetus to this new movement toward real Black social political power and economic freedom. Now, let me say something about Afrocentric culture. All right. I'm not talking about culture nationalism. All right. I want to make a distinction between culture nationalism and revolutionary nationalism. All right. We can speak all the Swahili you want. Okay. All the Arabic you want. Or what the dashikis and the thobes and all the accoutrements of proclaiming yourself as African. Okay. But you're still in alliance with the agencies, right? With the petty bourgeoisie, right? You're still in believing that electoral politics is going to free you, right? Then what you're showing is basically a culture nationalist. You are a nationalist by culture. Okay. But social, economic, and politically, you're tied to the system of exploitation. Right. However, revolutionary nationalists can do the same thing. Wear the equipment, wear the clothes, speak the language, and etc. But he knows emphatically that they're fighting a war against a system of oppression, right? And opposing that system of oppression, right? So when we turn and look at Afrocentric, right, the whole of our African culture, the whole of African culture informs us what? We have been resisting the system of white supremacy since day one. Okay. Wherever you find Africans resisting, then that is what you want to make central to your culture. Okay. And that's what I mean by called Afrocentric. Okay. The means from which it is revolutionary. Right. And we're gaining our spirit, as I said, our spirit, our inspiration from those struggles of African people freeing themselves from colonial domination and neo-colonial rule. Okay. So that's important. In terms of our own identity. These models, whether we use them or don't use them, I think the idea of what they're saying is we are African people. That means that's our identity. That's who we are. We are African, right? I say we're African, right? We will never forget. Why we never forget? Because we have to be always engaged in war, 24/7. You know, every time I walk out the house, I don't know if I'm coming back. I don't know if I'm coming back. Right? I had a car accident Sunday, right? Some dude ran in the back of me Sunday in New York City. I banged my car up, okay? I couldn't call the cops because it was a white guy. All right, how they gonna treat it? And if it escalated, if they got nasty with me, right? You know what I'm gonna do? You know what I mean? So I'm not accepting it. I'm not. Okay. They'll have to throw me on the ground like they did that football player, I guess. I don't know.
Is there anybody?
Yeah. You know? And that's the risk that we take every day when we walk out the door. We are the only people who have to give our children the talk. Why we gotta give our kids the talk? Because we know there are entities out there that will murder our people on the street. You know what I'm saying? But we're not conscious. We're not It's not to our conscience. It's become an innate practice now, right? A practice of self-preservation with no content, no context to it, right? So we have to maintain that context. And understand that we have enemies of Black people in this country, and they will murder us with impunity.
Probably Jalil, they're gonna cut me off here. I'm
Okay, okay, brother. All right. So that's the 25 pages, brothers and sisters. We should have more discussions. Y'all got to come up with some questions now. To my ranting and raving. All right, about what's going on in this book. In those times, remember those times. I wrote that specifically for the Black Panther Party and what we represented at that time. In those times, I was there. I was reflecting in the cell. So let me just sit down and write something about who he is, or who we are, or who we were, right? And in those times, all right. Can I have time for me to read this? I like this one.
We got like 2 minutes left. They're gonna cut it off though.
Yeah, 2 minutes. All right, 2 minutes. I'll do this in 30 seconds, right?
All right.
It was a time when yesterday's dreams were preferred, a period where personal sacrifice was not abandoned, but were regarded as doing one's part. It was a time when young men and young women and young men had faith and sought to realize their truth for the future. They knew it was not a matter of peace while at war, but rather peace after the revolution. They understood Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze was a diversion, where the memory of being a slave was washed away in acid, tripping down the steep abyss of conformity to racist oppression. It was a time when the target oink in the masquerade of law and order, but the only order it knew was to ensure the corporate supply and demand continued to exploit the community. In those times, young Black men and women matriculated in the lessons of street warfare, in the art of survival, while building survival programs, fighting battles wearing uniforms of Black leather jackets and berets. Their slogans were power to the people and Black power to Black people. Yet they knew the revolution would not be televised except for when one of them was murdered or captured or ran into exile. COINTELPRO would permit that broadcast in order to destroy the reality of the revolution. It was a time when Black love reigned supreme and making babies was held in esteem. Make babies for the revolution before I die was the war cry. And we had caught the infection from dream that if you believed it, then you would be it and live it and let it be. And we believed it, we lived it. What we let be had no relevance in those times.
Yeah. All right. That's a great class. It's a great way to end that. We'll be back probably next week. So you guys, like I said, reach out to the Dallas chapter, Community Movement Builders, if you guys want to come in for another class or join. Thank y'all.
All power to the people. Assalamu alaikum.
All power to the people.
Free land.
People.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.
Free land.